Oh crap, look at this! We're going to be talking about repairing the front part, the front pivoting system on my car Blue Lightning. So yeah, what happened to it? Well, lots of bumps and stuff on the side of the track caused this to basically crack off. And this whole thing is held together by crazy glue, as you see here. Crazy glue here, and crazy glue here. And once this is in place, then you've got this front pivoting system, the DXN style front pivoting system. Now, what I could do is bolt it down, drill holes and bolt down some screws, some countersunk screws in this part here upward, so that this will be secured in place. I could certainly do that, but if you recall, one of the things that I had gripes about this car was the fact that this part on this side was a lot looser than this part on this side. And this is what I mean by that. You could wiggle this somewhat, right? Because the hole is exactly the size that I need. But here on this side, you can wiggle it a lot more. So imagine, if you will, think about like when you were a kid and you had a loose tooth because your baby tooth was coming out and your permanent tooth was growing in. So a loose tooth, there's two kinds of loose teeth, right? Well, there's many kinds of loose teeth, but there's one that's like slightly loose, and then there's one that's like, whoa, it's pretty loose. It's like on its way out. So yeah, this one could be considered the one that's slightly loose, and this one is the one that basically is like, it's pretty loose. So the hole here on this side, on this part here, the hole is larger on this side. So I could rebuild this. And this is my chance to basically rebuild this so that I have a new N-shaped part here. So then I could glue the new part onto here and yeah, or bolt it down with countersunk screws, and it'll be really, really nice and stable on the front. So there's no crazy rocking on one side. So that was one of the things that always bugged me about this particular car. It is a very nice car, a very fast car, nonetheless. It's just that this one hole on this side was a lot larger. Well, by a lot larger, I mean we're talking about fractions of a millimeter. So yeah, you want the two of them to basically, if they move, the screw moves, they should move kind of like the same way, right? Not as loose as this. This is very loose compared to this one. And there's ways of going around that, right? So I could opt for a single pivot, just like the newer style pivoting systems I've seen. But I like this double pivot here. It gives you a little extra security. That's pretty cool. So it's a chance for me to basically rebuild this and just make this a lot better than it currently is. I mean, this is a car that is very, very fast, especially with a Hyper Dash motor. It beats a lot of Mach Dash motor cars. Very, very cool. So yeah, and I like everything about it so far. It's got this wonderful rear pivot that I built, yeah, and it's finally a mushroom pivot like everybody wanted me to make. And it took me a while to actually come to grips with, yeah, maybe I should try this mushroom pivoting system instead of using this unusual car catcher pivoting system that I was using all this time. So the car catcher material pivoting system actually does work. It actually does work well, but it doesn't last a long time. So with more machinery involved rather than more flimsy plastic involved, you get something that lasts a lot longer. And you really want to build your cars to last rather than continue to make these adjustments and try to get your jalopy to win. You want to get something that's like your cool machine to win. So right now, this is more machine than jalopy. And I would even say that out of all of my cars, this is probably one of the most machine-like cars, like precision machinery type cars that I've built. And so pretty darn cool. And yeah, I've learned a lot from various people on how to make this car like as good as it is. So I'm very happy with it. So yeah, that's how to improve this part here. So let me tell you about some of the things. These are subtle things. And a lot of you might think that like maybe it's not worth mentioning subtle things, but no, subtle things are worth a lot. So especially in open class. In open class, I timed a lot of races. So tune class and open class, sometimes the difference between the two can be measured in terms of 1 second. And you might like sit back and go, wait a minute, how can that be, right? So here's the thing. Some of you might ask to yourself like, can I enter a tune class car in an open class race? Well, yes, of course. You can enter a box stock car in an open class race, and if everybody else courses out but you, of course you'll win. But what's the and that's kind of cool, but really what's the fun in that when you're trying to build something that's like awesome and you're trying to race against other cars that are awesome. And so if you have a car that's like a basic car and you beat them, it's just only because they coursed out. Like that's you're not always going to win that way. You're probably going to win like 1 out of 1,000 maybe less than that. Let's just say 1 out of 1,000 races because most people who have open class cars will be able to make the proper adjustments so that they stay on the track and win the race. And most likely they will be faster than your box stock car. So you want to have these little things, these little refinements that allow your open class vehicle to edge out any tune class car. So what are some of the big differences, the biggest differences between tune class and open class? The weight of the car. So tune class cars typically are pretty heavy because you want to keep that car on the track. You've got all this machinery on it. You want it to be as fast as possible given that heavy weight. So you're looking at a car that might be about 138 to 140 grams, around there. With open class, so that's tune class. With open class, you are looking at cars that are sometimes as low as 103 to 107 grams. Pretty light. So 30 grams difference. So chances of open class cars coursing out might even be higher, like they usually are higher, than tune class cars. Tune class cars are heavy, they stay down, they go fast, and yeah, pretty darn cool. And if you stick a Hyperdash motor in a tune class car and it happens to stay down, then yeah, you got a super brilliant car. But really, if you've got a Hyperdash motor in a 105 gram car, it's more than likely going to beat the 140 gram tune class monster with the same engine. So lightness with the same motor usually wins. And it's because of, well, you've got all these dampers, right? These dampers that are more high functioning than a tune class car. So tune class dampers are limited by the length of the screw that the dampers are on, right? So open class cars, you've got a little more range, right? So instead of just thinking about the damper lengths being like this, now we're thinking about like, here it could go as high as this. So really, you're going for that distance from here to here, and that little minor adjustment is what will enable you to land safely back on the track and continue the race and continue to race very quickly. So if you've got a suspension system, then suddenly you don't have that bounce. You just have flat, or more or less flat. If you have a bounce, it's going to be a minor bounce, and then you can continue on. So you want to minimize the bounce and just let it go bounce and go on. So if you could do that with your cars, then yeah, you're golden in open class. So that's the goal. Now, some of you, like me, like non-MS suspension chassis open class cars, and so you have to account for these bumps. And so you might need like what I call an external dampening system. So besides just the normal body dampers and tail dampers, you would also need to use some form of sponge tire, for example. So a lot of cars might have these specialized tires right here where you have low fricks in the front with sponge on the edges and super hard in the rear with sponge on the edges right there. So in case there is a bump, your car is most likely not going to land on all four wheels. It's probably going to land on two wheels. And so that slight hit right there with the sponge, that's going to absorb a minor percentage of the impact, just enough, hopefully, so that your car can continue to go on. So yeah, and given the fact that it's got all these other things like the body damper, the tail damper, other dampers, you see on the rear, I've got these additional dampers to deal with certain bumps on the road, on the track. So yeah, they're not inclines, but they are like little bumps on the road. So to deal with those, I added these right here, and it kept the car on the track. So yeah, here, you don't really need rear dampers unless your car is just not very well built, because your suspension system should basically deal with the dampening. So here, it should land more or less flat. Now, of course, you see a little bit of bump up on the front because I don't have this on it. But if I did and it was attached, it would land completely flat. Pretty darn cool. So yeah, what is this thing? So all this like stuff that I pre-talked about, what is this? Why do we need this, right? So you have this in place so that there's a tiny bit of dampening right here as well. So it's going to make sure that this thing is not going to keep slamming onto the car chassis. So it's of course it's going to slam on the car chassis, but it's going to dampen it slightly. So any little bit that you can do helps with the dampening effect, so you don't get this harsh crash. You want it to just go whoomp rather than click. So there's a little dampening system right there for the body damper. On the rear, we have this thing, like a lot of people make their tail dampers using car catcher material, myself included. So here I've got a car catcher, and if you see the back here, I have it weighted down with some weights. So I taped the weights on here. So the reason why I taped this one on here is because this particular track required a more heavy tail damper than other tracks that this car raced on. So this is what I needed to be able to keep the car on the road, keep the car on the track. So yes, on this particular one, I don't have sponges because I don't need them. I've got the suspension system. Instead, I've got low fricks in the front, and as you see, it's offset, so I get, basically this is like a more narrow tire with this offset. And the rear, I have a full width tire that has super hard with a little bit of low fricks on the edges right there. So if it does land slightly sideways like this, slightly at an angle, this is going to continue on until it lands flat, and then it continues on. So very, very cool. So yeah, the design of your tires, the wheel choice is very important. Some people like to just use completely all super hards on here, and there's like a negligible difference, right? So the negligible difference, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about fractions of a second, and sometimes those fractions of a second add up. So if you can put a sophisticated tire on there that's dual purpose, right? So two different tire compounds on one tire, your car typically will be able to deal with certain challenges on the track better than if you just had a single compound tire. So yeah, so also take that into consideration. Now, some of the wiggleness that I see on both sides here is because I do not have anything to actually support the screws so that they would just stay stiff and perpendicular. So what I could do is cut out a little piece of car catcher material and glue it or adhere it to this bottom plate. And then I put my Tamiya tape on there, and then I put my brake on there, and then I put my Tamiya tape over that. And so once I have that, it's going to be very strong, and this will probably wiggle a lot less on both sides. So that's tip number 3. So other things that people do, a lot of people like to shave off stuff on the bottom to make things flatter as well. So there's a lot of things on the underside of your chassis that you could basically shave down so that you get a flat surface, so that when they pass that ruler, the 1mm measuring stick underneath your car, it will pass. So you want to make sure it passes. You want to get rid of all those little bumps that could potentially hit the ruler and then cause your car to be DQ'd. So you'll see that, like Mad Tang, for example, when you buy a chassis from him, things are so sanded down that it's almost hard to actually turn the car on because the on-off switch, the dial, is like so shaved down that you have to like really, really grab it firmly to be able to turn it on and off. So yeah, it doesn't have to be that shaved down, but you could try to shave it down as much as you can so you get that little extra fraction of a millimeter so you'll clear the ruler. Because some racing events are more finicky than others, so some of them will just make sure that like they can see underneath and it looks like it's 1mm. Others will take that ruler as gospel and make sure that the entire underside of the car passes the 1mm distance, right? So you want to make sure of that. So when in doubt, make sure that it's more towards 1.5mm than 1mm. That's how you can ensure that your car will always pass with that 1mm gauge. So yeah, very, very cool. So other things you can try, so there's another tip. What are we up to? Tip number 5, I think. You can always grease the parts that move on your car, the pivots I'm talking about. What I usually do is on the rear, right where the carbons hit the chassis itself, I squeeze in a little bit of grease in between those points so that when I test this, this thing slides up easily, or more easily than if I did not have grease between the chassis and the carbons. So that's a good tip too. And you want to try to oil certain things too. So if you can oil the mushroom, where the mushroom cap is, the spring. You could oil the springs here. You could oil any dampers. So here, with this, you can oil the screw here, the screw threads, so that these slide up and down more easily. So there's lots of things that you can lubricate and allow your car to basically get those fractions of a second of time when you're racing against other cars. Now, the last tip I'm going to give you is about battery voltages. So remember that when you're racing in practice, whatever you amp up your batteries to be in practice, if you're practicing solo, that's what it's going to be solo. But you also have to account for other people racing against you. And so if you used that very same battery voltage in practice that worked with and against someone else on the track, if you've got more than one car racing against you, you can basically simulate the conditions of how a race would be. So my philosophy is to lower the battery voltage slightly so that you could deal with track vibrations. And if you do that, then more than likely your car will stay on the track, still be competitive, and you might even win. So yeah, do give that a try. Of course, if you want to go for broke, go for it. Amp up your battery voltages as much as you want. But really, you want to stay kind of safe and conservative when you're racing for the finals. So the finals, it's like a lot of people I know, they go for broke and they want to totally win, right? They want to just not win, but they want to win. And that's great, but you also want to stay on the track. So it's wonderful if you're like faster than everybody else, but you want to also stay on the track. And I measured tune class versus open class and how long the races were between the two of them. It was like under 1 second. So yeah, but you can easily tell that the open class cars were in fact faster than the tune class cars, and they stayed on the track better for the most part. But yeah, open class is like a different animal, and if you were to try to race your one lone tune class car against open class cars, you probably will not win. And it's kind of like weird saying this when a car that like can totally win tune class seems like it could win against open class cars, but open class cars are just built a little differently. So although you might win a race or two with your tune class car against open class cars, more than likely there will be things about the track that you won't be able to negotiate very well compared to an open class car. And because the open class car has those additional features that could negotiate the obstacles better, the open class car will probably beat you. And it's kind of weird because a fraction of a second, like, we think that it's not that much, right? But that could mean the difference. Like, it's basically like a couple of car lengths right there. And a couple of car lengths. We're looking at things that closely in open class. So really, open classes is a game of fractions of seconds. Tune class is about trying to use your parts and not modify anything. Box stock is about using exactly what's in the box and nothing else, and using your smarts, know-how, and building skills to make your car as great as possible. And remember, kids class should only be for kids. You should not be building your cars and then giving them to your kids to race. That's not a good thing. That doesn't really teach them anything. Sure, that might teach them to be on the podium and they look like they're winners, but like really, they're not learning anything about the hobby. So kids races should be confined to kids who actually build the cars for kids class. And then there's BMAX, and that's supposed to be like, it's tune class, but with some restrictions so that, yeah, everybody can be on a level playing field, but BMAX also allows you to put in a fancier motor than just the Rev, Torque, or atomic tuned motors. So yeah, pretty darn cool. So no Ultra Dash, no Plasma Dash in any of these classes. You have to use or Jet Dash. You have to use everything that's below Ultra and Plasma and Jet. And that's valid for the open class cars. So yeah, pretty darn cool. And you know what? There are races that do in fact have Ultra Dash motors in them. Like you could have like a non-sanctioned Tamiya race and everybody can agree to race with an Ultra Dash motor or a Plasma Dash motor. And that could be fun, right? Of course, it could be devastating too to see your car crash into a million pieces in a wall. But yeah, it could be fun to see that at least once. It's something to kind of remember, I suppose. So yeah, pretty darn cool. So everybody, if you like this video, please slam the like button, subscribe to my channel. You'll see more videos just like this one. Until next time, everybody, see you. Bye.